Imagine your skin not as something fixed, but as a canvas waiting for memory. Thousands of years ago, before maps and books, before written alphabets in many places, people carried their histories on their bodies. They marked themselves not for fashion in the modern sense, but as living records. Some marks spoke of journeys, others of family lines, and others of victories over hardship. These designs were not random. They were deliberate, careful, and often permanent, and they were made with tools far more primitive and far more personal than anything we would call a needle today. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you something, and I want you to write it in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it right now? I'm curious to see how far these stories travel, and whether you're hearing this as night falls or while the sun is still climbing over your day. Because, in a way, the people we're talking about tonight, those first tattooed ancestors, also left messages across time and distance, though theirs were carved into skin, not written in comment section. The earliest known human to bear tattoos is a man we now call Ötzi. Discovered frozen in the Italian Alps in 1991. His body is over 5,000 years old, preserved almost perfectly in ice. And on his skin, researchers found more than 60 tattoos. Simple, dark lines and small crosses. These weren't decorative in the way we might imagine. Many were placed on joints and along the spine. Some scientists believe they were part of a therapeutic practice, similar to acupuncture. In other words, these tattoos may have been as much about health as identity. But Ötzi was far from alone in this practice. Around the world, in places separated by oceans and centuries, people were tattooing themselves with tools made from bone, stone, or sharpened wood. In Polynesia, for example, the art of tartare, the origin of our modern word tattoo, used comb-like tools dipped in pigment and tapped into the skin with a small mallet. The process was slow, painful, and deeply symbolic. Each mark told a story of family, status, and life's milestones. To be without these marks was, in some communities, to be incomplete. Ancient Egypt also embraced tattoos, particularly among women. Mummies from as early as 2000 BCE have been found with dotted patterns across their bellies, thighs, and chests. Some historians believe these were protective charms, perhaps connected to childbirth, or symbols of devotion to certain deities. The pigment was made from soot or other natural materials, rubbed into the tiny punctures made by the tattooing tool. These designs would fade and change over time, aging alongside the person who carried them, a constant physical reminder of a personal or spiritual bond.
In Siberia's Paziric culture, preserved in the permafrost of the Altai Mountains, tattooing reached remarkable artistic heights. Warriors and nobles alike were buried with intricate designs still visible after more than 2,000 years. The patterns were complex, swirling animals, mythical creatures, and symbolic shapes. These tattoos weren't just decoration, they were an introduction, a statement of who you were and what you stood for, even in death. The detail suggests a level of skill and artistry that rivals any modern tattooist.
One of the fascinating things about early tattooing is how widespread it was. From South America's Chinchero mummies to the Ainu of Japan, cultures that had no direct contact with each other arrived at the same idea. The body could be changed to carry meaning. This suggests a deep, almost universal human instinct to mark significant moments, roles, or beliefs directly on our own skin. Whether it was achieved by tapping pigment into punctured skin, rubbing ash into cuts, or other local methods, the result was the same: a permanent record that traveled wherever the wearer went.
The materials themselves tell their own story. Pigments came from the land, crushed minerals, charred wood, or plant-based dyes. Tools were made from animal bones, sharpened stones, or even thorns. In Polynesia, the teeth of certain fish were prized for their ability to make clean punctures. In Arctic cultures, sinew thread coated in pigment could be stitched through the skin to leave lines of ink. Each method required patience, resilience, and an acceptance of pain. Tattooing wasn't casual. It was an event, often surrounded by ceremony and meaning. The pain was part of the point. Many early cultures saw endurance under the needle as a rite of passage. A young person receiving their first tattoo might be surrounded by family or the entire community. The process accompanied by songs, chants, or offerings. In this way, the tattoo became more than an image. It became a shared experience, a story told not only in ink but in memory. To bear the mark was to say, I have endured, I belong, and I carry this identity with pride. Even the placement of tattoos had meaning. In some cultures, designs were located on parts of the body thought to hold spiritual power or to ward off illness. In others, they marked military rank or tribal affiliation. And for some, tattoos acted almost like passports, visible proof of who you were and where you came from, recognized instantly by those who shared your customs. These marks could welcome you into certain spaces or bar you from them entirely. The skin was a statement as visible as clothing, but far less temporary. It's worth remembering that many of these ancient tattoo traditions were suppressed or erased under colonial rule, religious conversion, or modern laws. Missionaries in Polynesia, for example, discouraged tattooing, associating it with pagan practices. In Japan, tattoos became linked with criminality, forcing the art underground. And yet, even after centuries of prohibition, these traditions often survived, hidden, adapted, or revived by those determined not to let the ink fade from their heritage. When we look at these early tattoos today, preserved in ice, on mummies, or in the living traditions that continue, we are seeing more than decoration. We are looking at a form of communication older than most languages, and a form of art that requires the artist and the subject to be the same canvas. In every line and mark, there is a link across centuries, a quiet conversation between past and present. And perhaps that's why, even in an age of screens and photographs, the urge to mark our skin still hasn't gone away. In many cultures, tattoos were more than decoration. They were public declarations of rank, courage, and belonging. To look at a person's skin was to read their life story, victories in battle, leadership in a tribe, or achievements in a rite of passage. These marks were visible proof of status, and they carried as much authority as a crown or a sword. In some places, they could open doors, granting privileges that those without ink could never dream of. In others, they could mark you as untouchable, set apart from the rest. Among the Maori of New Zealand, the moko, intricate tattoos carved into the skin with chisels, told a story not just of the individual, but of their lineage. The patterns on the face were as unique as fingerprints, each swirl and curve representing ancestry, achievements, and social standing. To meet another's gaze was to see their family tree inscribed right there. No introduction required. These designs were considered so sacred that they were treated as living documents, and to touch them without permission
was a grave insult. In the Philippines, the Kalinga people wore their achievements on their arms and chests. For men, elaborate tattoos called batek marked successful head-hunting raids, a symbol of bravery and honor. For women, tattoos could signify beauty, readiness for marriage, and skill in weaving. The process was painful and time-consuming, but enduring it was a demonstration of resilience, proof that the bearer had the strength to face life's hardships. In this way, the ink itself became a kind of shield, protecting the reputation and dignity of the wearer. Far to the north, among the Norse, tattooing is believed to have marked warriors and traders alike. Accounts from Arab traveller Ahmad ibn Fadlan in the 10th century describe Rus merchants covered in designs from fingernails to necks, filled with trees, symbols, and patterns. These marks may have been protective charms, personal emblems, or signs of allegiance. In an age when trust was often a matter of survival, such symbols could announce loyalty before a single word was spoken. In Japan, before tattoos became linked to the criminal underworld, they had deep connections to identity and protection. During the Edo period, irezumi could signify devotion to a particular cause or group. Some firefighters, for instance, wore elaborate full-body tattoos depicting gods and mythical beasts, believing they would protect them from the flames. These designs, rich in color and detail, were badges of courage, visible when uniforms were shed, and skin became the canvas for personal honor. In the Pacific Northwest, the Haida and Tlingit peoples used tattoos to display clan crests and personal achievements. Each mark was a record of hunts, voyages, and rites of passage. A tattooed figure arriving in a distant village was instantly recognized for their deeds, their skin a portable biography. The designs also reinforced social hierarchies, as certain symbols could only be worn by those with the right ancestry or who had performed specific acts of valor. In Burma, men once wore protective tattoos called yantra, believed to guard against bullets and blades. Applied by monks or skilled practitioners, these designs combined geometric shapes with sacred inscriptions. They were often placed over the chest, arms, or thighs, vital areas in combat. Soldiers heading into battle wore their tattoos like armor, trusting in the power of ink to shield them from harm. Whether or not it worked in a physical sense, it strengthened their spirit, which in war could be just as important as steel. The ancient Scythians
of the Eurasian steppe were also no strangers to tattooed power. Archaeological finds from frozen burial mounds show warriors adorned with detailed animal motifs, deer, eagles, and mythical beasts. These were likely totemic symbols, believed to grant strength, speed, or cunning. In the harsh world of nomadic warfare, such imagery was more than ornament. It was a declaration of identity, linking the wearer to the natural forces they revered and feared.
For some, marks of power could be a double-edged sword. In certain societies, they granted privilege, but they also bound the wearer to strict codes of conduct. A warrior whose tattoos proclaimed courage could not afford to show cowardice without losing face. In communities where inked designs marked high rank, wearing them without earning them was considered a grave offense, sometimes punishable by death. The skin was not just a personal choice, it was a public contract, and breaking it could be fatal.
Even in places where tattooing faded, echoes of these traditions remained. Military medals, regimental insignias, or even sports team logos serve similar purposes today. Visible markers of belonging, honor, and achievement. The medium has changed, but the impulse remains constant. Human beings have always sought to display who they are in ways that others can see, recognize, and remember.
It is easy to look at ancient tattooed skin in a museum and think only of art. But in its time, that art carried weight, sometimes enough to determine a person's fate. These designs were not chosen lightly, and their meaning was not hidden. They were statements made in a language everyone around you could read, a kind of living heraldry, worn not on banners, but on the body itself.
And so, marks of power remain one of history's most enduring forms of personal and political expression. Whether scratched into the skin with bone, tapped in with wood, or carved with metal, they spoke in ways that transcended speech. They told the world who you were, and in many cases, who you could never stop being.
Across much of human history, pain was not something to be avoided. It was something to be endured, even embraced when crossing the thresholds of life. In many cultures, body modification rituals were inseparable from the idea of transformation. The discomfort, sometimes lasting hours or days, was as essential as the ink, scar, or ornament left behind. To be changed on the outside meant you had proven something on the inside, and the path to that proof was rarely gentle.
In Polynesian tattooing traditions, the process was often drawn out over multiple sessions.
each one demanding stillness under the tap-tap rhythm of bone combs striking skin. The pain was intense, sharp, and unavoidable. Yet the community gathered around the person receiving the marks, offering songs, food, and encouragement. This was not a private act, it was a public testament to endurance. Each session was a step towards social adulthood, each wince a shared memory for all who watched.
Among the Inuit, the practice of skin stitching was both artistic and deeply physical. Thread coated with soot or pigment was sewn directly through the skin with bone needles. The process was slow and often left swelling and tenderness for days. But for the women who bore these marks, the pain was an initiation into maturity, marking readiness for marriage and the responsibilities of adult life. The designs were not only decorative, they were woven into the very fabric of identity.
In parts of West Africa, scarification carried the same weight. Cuts made with sharp blades were carefully arranged into patterns, then rubbed with ash or plant extracts to create raised scars. The healing process could take weeks, during which infection was a constant risk. Yet the endurance of this pain was seen as proof of courage and discipline. A person who could submit to the knife without flinching showed the kind of control and strength valued in both men and women.
In Papua New Guinea, certain Sepik River communities practiced crocodile scarification for young men. The skin of the chest, back, and shoulders was cut in patterns meant to resemble the scales of the crocodile, a creature considered both powerful and sacred. The ritual lasted hours, and recovery was slow, but the scars became lifelong emblems of bravery, linking the wearer to the spirit of the animal. For those who carried them, the pain was a badge, and the scars a permanent uniform.
For the Maasai of East Africa, ear stretching and piercing were rites of passage, often performed in adolescence. Large holes were made with thorns or knives, then gradually widened with heavier ornaments. The initial procedure could be painful and prone to tearing, but the slow, deliberate stretching was part of the discipline. Each stage brought the individual closer to adulthood, and each ornament worn afterward was a quiet reminder of what they had endured to reach that point.
Pain also played a spiritual role. In many societies, enduring physical trials was believed to open the mind
to visions or deeper truths. The trance-like state reached during long, painful modification sessions was considered a form of communion with ancestors or gods. Whether or not those visions came from the spirit world or the body's own reactions to stress, they shaped the meaning of the experience. Pain was not only a barrier, it was a bridge.
The social aspect of these rituals cannot be overstated. A person undergoing modification was rarely alone. Family, peers, or elders often surrounded them, turning personal suffering into a collective event. It was a performance of endurance, where the measure of a person's worth was visible in their composure. Those who faltered risked losing respect, while those who endured in silence could earn admiration for life.
Even today, echoes of this remain. Modern piercings, tattoos, and even endurance sports borrow the same logic. Pain is proof. It may no longer be tied to adulthood or tribal status, but the personal sense of achievement is much the same. People speak of earning their tattoos or surviving a difficult piercing, as though the discomfort itself adds to the value of the outcome.
For ancient societies, however, the stakes were far higher. A failed rite could mean exclusion from marriage, leadership, or even basic acceptance within the community. Pain in this context was not optional. It was a currency for belonging, and those who could not pay it were left standing outside the circle.
Looking back, it is easy to see these practices as harsh or unnecessary. But for those who lived them, pain was not cruelty. It was transformation. It was the proof of readiness to step into a new role, witnessed and remembered by all who saw it happen. The scars, the ink, the stretched skin, these were not just the results. They were the evidence of a passage that had been paid for in the oldest currency of all, endurance.
There have always been people willing to mark their skin, and there have always been others determined to stop them. Across history, the reasons for banning tattoos have been as varied as the designs themselves. Sometimes the prohibition was rooted in religion, where the human body was seen as sacred and untouchable. Other times it came from political authority, determined to control who could be marked and why. In both cases, ink on the skin could be seen as a challenge to power, and power has rarely tolerated challenges. In Japan, The story of tattoo prohibition stretches back centuries. During the Edo period, intricate full-body tattoos were celebrated by some, but condemned by the ruling class. By the 19th century, Japan's leaders sought to present the country as civilized to the West, and visible tattoos were declared illegal. The government wanted to erase any association with criminality or savagery, and so the art form went underground. The ban didn't kill the tradition, it simply pushed it into secrecy, where it survived among those willing to risk arrest for their craft.
In Europe, the relationship between tattoos and authority was complex. In early medieval times, some Christian communities discouraged or outright banned tattooing, citing religious scripture. The idea was that the body was a divine creation, and altering it was a form of defiance. Yet, paradoxically, crusaders and pilgrims sometimes tattooed crosses or holy symbols on themselves, believing these marks would protect their souls. The tension between piety and prohibition meant that in some places the same church that forbade tattoos also blessed them under certain conditions.
The Middle East, too, saw its share of debate over ink. Islamic law, as interpreted by many scholars, prohibited permanent body modification, including tattooing. The reasoning was similar to Christian arguments, that altering God's creation was a form of disrespect. However, this wasn't universal. In some communities, small decorative or symbolic tattoos were tolerated, especially among women, often hidden beneath clothing. The lines between acceptable and forbidden were rarely clear, shifting with local customs and interpretations.
In parts of the Ottoman Empire, tattooing was both practiced and condemned. Nomadic and rural communities kept their traditions alive, while urban authorities discouraged or fined those who marked themselves. For women, certain facial tattoos, often dots or small patterns on the chin, were linked to beauty or protection from the evil eye. Authorities might frown on them, but they were difficult to stamp out entirely, woven too deeply into daily life and personal identity. Sometimes the ban on tattoos had nothing to do with religion at all. In certain periods, rulers feared that tattooed symbols could mark allegiance to rebellious groups or criminal gangs. Outlawing these marks was a way of breaking group identity and reasserting control. The ink was treated like a flag, and in the eyes of the authorities, a flag in the wrong hands was a threat.
Colonial powers often brought their own bans with them. Missionaries in Polynesia, for example, condemned tattooing as heathen and worked to replace it with European dress and customs. In doing so, they weren't just changing appearances. They were dismantling a language of skin that had existed for generations. For the colonized, losing the right to tattoo was losing a form of history, one that couldn't be rewritten in books.
Even when legal, tattoos could be socially forbidden. In some societies, wearing certain designs without earning them through rank or achievement was considered deeply offensive. The penalty might not come from a court, but from the community itself. Ridicule, ostracism, or worse. In these cases, the unwritten laws could be as strict as the official ones, and just as effective at keeping ink off certain skins. Ironically, in many places, prohibition only increased the allure. The act of getting a tattoo became a statement in itself, a quiet rebellion against authority. In Japan, outlawed tattoo masters developed increasingly elaborate styles for clients willing to defy the ban. In Europe, sailors and soldiers wore their tattoos as badges of defiance against the tidy, unmarked bodies of the elite. The ink became more than a design. It was a declaration. I will choose what I carry on my skin. Over time, some bans faded, replaced by regulation or simple tolerance. Others remain in place today, shaped by religion, politics, or cultural norms. In each case, the existence of forbidden ink reminds us that the body is never entirely our own in the eyes of those who seek to control it. To wear such marks in times and places where they were banned was to carry both beauty and risk, visible proof that freedom often comes at a cost.
And so, throughout history, the prohibition of tattoos has said as much about the fears of the powerful as it has about the desires of the tattooed. Whether enforced by law, religion, or community, these bans were rarely just about the ink. They were about who controls the story a body can tell, and who has the right to speak it at all. In many ancient societies, beauty and identity were not left to chance. From South America to Central Asia, parents sometimes shaped the very bones of their children's heads, creating elongated skulls that would last for life. To modern eyes, this might seem strange or even unsettling, but in those cultures it was a sign of belonging, a mark of noble birth, or even a connection to the divine. The process began in infancy, when the skull was soft and malleable, and ended years later, leaving a shape that could never be hidden. The earliest evidence of deliberate skull elongation comes from around 11,000 years ago. Archaeologists have found remains in what is now Shanidar Cave in Iraq, showing clear signs of cranial modification. But the practice was far from limited to one region. It appears across the globe, in the Andes of Peru, among the Huns of Central Asia, and in parts of Africa and the Pacific. The universality suggests that the idea, altering the head to signal status, arose independently in many societies. In the highlands of Peru, the Paracas culture produced some of the most striking examples. Infants' heads were bound with cloths or placed between wooden boards to gradually change their shape. The result was a tall, sweeping skull that gave the wearer a distinctive silhouette. This was not done randomly. The elongated head was associated with higher social rank, and those who bore it often came from elite families. In death, they were buried with fine textiles and precious items, reinforcing their elevated position. Among the Huns, skull modification served as a visual marker of identity. As these nomadic warriors moved across Eurasia, their appearance set them apart from neighboring peoples. The elongated skull may have been intended to intimidate enemies or signal unity within the group. When combined with traditional clothing, hairstyles, and weaponry, it created a powerful cultural image, one that could be recognized even from a distance on the open steppe. The process itself was slow but effective. Because infant skull bones are soft and the sutures have not yet fused, gentle but constant pressure could guide their growth. Cloth wraps, wooden boards, or leather straps were used, adjusted over months and years. This was not a temporary discomfort. It was a commitment that required attention from parents and caregivers throughout childhood. By the time the skull was fully formed, the shape was permanent, a lifelong statement. In some cultures, the elongated skull was believed to enhance spiritual connection. In parts of Africa, it was linked to wisdom or a heightened state of consciousness. In Mesoamerica, the Maya associated cranial modification with beauty and nobility.
artists depicted gods and rulers with sloping foreheads and tall craniums, suggesting that to look like this was to approach the divine. Whether or not the belief was literal, the symbolism was powerful. Shaping the head was shaping destiny.
Critics of the practice, both ancient and modern, have questioned whether it caused harm. Medical studies suggest that while the shape changed, brain capacity was not significantly affected. Most individuals lived normal lives, though the modification may have slightly altered balance or vision. In its own time, however, these concerns mattered less than the social benefits. To belong to the right group or lineage could mean security, influence, and respect. European colonists encountering skull elongation often reacted with shock. In the 19th century, explorers and anthropologists collected skulls as curiosities, displaying them in museums as oddities rather than cultural artifacts. This outsider gaze stripped the practice of its meaning, reducing it to something strange instead of something deeply rooted in identity and tradition. Today, many researchers work to restore that context, seeing the skulls not as anomalies, but as markers of human creativity and social complexity.
It's worth noting that skull shaping was not always about status. In some small communities, it was simply a marker of belonging, a way to distinguish us from them. If you saw someone with the same head shape as yours, you knew they were kin or ally. In a world where loyalty could mean survival, this was a powerful, visible bond. The head was both a canvas and a passport. Though the practice has largely disappeared, it leaves behind questions. Why were so many different cultures drawn to the same idea without apparent contact? Was it purely aesthetic, or did it tap into something deeper in the human psyche, a need to shape ourselves to match our ideals? The answers may never be certain, but the evidence is undeniable. In shaping the head, these societies were also shaping identity.
Today, the elongated skull remains a potent image. In popular imagination, it is sometimes mistaken for evidence of aliens or lost civilizations. But the truth is more human and perhaps more impressive. With simple tools and patient dedication, ancient peoples could mold one of the most defining parts of the body, not out of necessity, but out of belief. In doing so, they left us a reminder that even the bones beneath our skin have been subject to the long, careful hand of culture. In imperial China, beauty often came with a hidden cost. and few traditions embodied that more than the binding of women's feet. For nearly 1,000 years, the practice reshaped not only the body, but the life of anyone who endured it. Tiny, arched feet, no more than 3 inches long, became a symbol of grace, refinement, and social status. Yet behind the embroidered shoes was a history of pain, restriction, and silence, where each step carried the weight of cultural expectation.
The origins of foot binding are debated. Some accounts trace it to the 10th century, when an emperor's favorite dancer bound her feet into the shape of a crescent moon to perform a graceful lotus dance. Others suggest it emerged gradually among the elite as a sign of wealth. After all, a woman with bound feet could not work in the fields, marking her as someone whose family could afford her leisure. From these beginnings, the custom spread slowly but firmly through Chinese society.
The process began early, often between the ages of 4 and 7. At this age, bones were still soft, and ligaments could be stretched or broken without immediate fatal harm. The toes were curled under the foot toward the sole. The arch was forced upward, and the foot was tightly bound with cloth strips. Over time, the bindings were tightened, breaking bones and reshaping the foot permanently. This was not a single act, but a prolonged ritual of daily maintenance, often lasting years.
The pain was constant. At first, walking was difficult, sometimes impossible without support. As the years passed, the feet adapted to their new shape, though the discomfort never truly disappeared. Infections were common, and gangrene was a constant risk. Still, the practice persisted, passed from mother to daughter, reinforced by the belief that beauty demanded sacrifice, and that a woman's worth was measured in part by the size of her feet.
Bound feet carried symbolic meaning far beyond appearance. They were linked to femininity, refinement, and sexual allure. The small, swaying steps of a woman with bound feet were considered enticing, the restricted gait turning every movement into a performance. In some circles, the sight of tiny embroidered slippers was as much a status marker as jewelry or silk clothing, signaling wealth and cultural sophistication. Socially, foot binding became a prerequisite for marriage in many regions. Families seeking to marry their daughters into wealthier households bound their feet as a form of investment in her future. A girl with natural, unbound feet might still marry, but her prospects would be limited, often to poorer or rural families. The choice, if it could be called that,
was rarely left to the girl herself. While the tradition was most common among the upper classes, it eventually spread to rural communities, though with variations. In poorer families, girls might bind their feet less severely, allowing some capacity for labor while still conforming to the ideal. Even partial binding, however, meant a lifetime of altered mobility and discomfort. The feet, once reshaped, could never return to their natural form.
Resistance to the practice existed, but was often muted. Some scholars and reformers in the late imperial period criticized foot binding as harmful and outdated. Missionaries arriving in the 19th century condemned it as barbaric, founding anti-foot binding societies that persuaded some families to abandon the tradition. Yet, for many, giving it up meant risking social exclusion, particularly in marriage arrangements, making change slow and uneven.
By the early 20th century, the tide began to turn. The new Republican government in China officially banned foot binding in 1912, though enforcement was inconsistent. In remote areas, the custom continued quietly for decades. Gradually, as new ideas of health, modernity, and women's rights took root, the bindings were removed, revealing feet that bore the marks of the past, twisted, fragile, and permanently reshaped.
The last generation of women with bound feet lived well into the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Their stories recorded in photographs and interviews. Many spoke with mixed feelings, pride in the beauty they were taught to value, sorrow for the pain they endured, and sometimes a quiet resentment at the choices made for them. Their lives were testimonials to a world where conformity was prized over comfort, and tradition outweighed personal freedom.
Today, the tiny lotus shoes that once concealed bound feet are museum artifacts, delicate and colorful. They are admired for their craftsmanship, but also serve as reminders of the human cost behind their beauty. Each pair is a fragment of a much larger story, one where the pursuit of perfection left deep marks both on the body and in the memory of a culture. The legacy of foot binding remains complex. It is remembered as both a symbol of oppression and a deeply ingrained aesthetic ideal. In the quiet curve of a bound foot, we see the power of tradition to shape lives in ways that endure long after the bindings themselves have been removed. And in that silence, history still whispers, reminding us how beauty has often walked hand in hand with pain. In 19th century Europe, fashion was not just about fabrics and colors. It was about shaping the body itself. And few garments did this more dramatically than the corset. For centuries, it was worn to sculpt the torso into a narrow waist and an upright posture, exaggerating the curves of the hips and bust. To some, it was the ultimate symbol of refinement. To others, it was a cage made of cloth and whalebone. Whether praised or criticized, the corset left an indelible mark on both bodies and society. The origins of corsetry date back to the 16th century, when European aristocrats sought rigid garments to control posture and display wealth. Early versions, called stays, were stiffened with reeds or thin strips of wood. Over time, these evolved into more elaborate designs, reinforced with whalebone or steel. By the Victorian era, the corset was a standard garment for women across classes, though the materials and quality varied according to wealth. The most extreme form of corsetry pursued the so-called wasp waist, a circumference sometimes reduced to less than 18 inches. Achieving this meant tightening laces over years, gradually compressing the rib cage and abdomen. For many women, this was not a choice, but an expectation. A small waist was linked to beauty, respectability, and, in some cases, a better marriage prospect. Fashion magazines, dressmakers, and social commentary reinforced the idea that a woman's figure was a visible reflection of her character. Wearing a corset could alter the body in lasting ways. Continuous pressure reshaped the rib cage, sometimes displacing internal organs. The diaphragm was restricted, making deep breaths difficult. Prolonged use could lead to weakened back muscles, as the corset structure replaced the need for natural support. Yet, despite these effects, many women defended corsets as comfortable once broken in, claiming that their bodies adapted to the garment's embrace. For some, the corset was more than an imposition. It was a source of personal pride. The daily ritual of lacing up, often with the help of a maid or family member, became a moment of transformation. Standing before a mirror, the wearer could see herself instantly reshaped into the ideal silhouette of the age. The act was intimate, almost ceremonial, and for many it reinforced a sense of belonging to a refined, civilized world. Men were not entirely absent from the story.
In certain periods, fashionable men also wore stays to smooth their figures or improve posture. Military officers sometimes used them as part of their uniforms, both for appearance and to support the back during long hours on horseback. These male corsets were generally less restrictive than women's versions, but they too reflected the period's obsession with disciplined, tailored bodies. The medical establishment was divided. Some doctors warned against the health risks of tight lacing, blaming it for fainting spells, digestive issues, and even miscarriages. Others dismissed these concerns, arguing that moderate corsetry posed no danger. The debate spilled into newspapers and public lectures, becoming part of the larger conversation about women's health, rights, and roles in society. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, changing attitudes began to loosen the corset's hold. The women's suffragette movement, advances in women's sports, and the introduction of looser clothing styles all contributed to its decline. Designers like Paul Poiret rejected the corset entirely, favoring draped silhouettes that allowed freer movement. Still, for many women, giving it up felt like stepping away from the familiar structure of both fashion and life. Even after its fall from everyday use, the corset never disappeared completely. It found a place in theatre, costume, and later in subcultures that embraced historical fashion or fetish aesthetics. Modern reinterpretations use elastic fabrics and lighter boning, offering the look without the same degree of restriction. Yet the image of the tightly laced waist remains one of the most enduring icons of historical femininity. The corset's legacy is tangled. It is remembered as a tool of oppression, forcing women into rigid ideals, and as a tool of self-expression, allowing them to sculpt their own image. Both views are true, depending on the wearer and the time. In the end, the corset was not just about fashion, it was about control, whether imposed by society or embraced by the individual.
Today, vintage corsets rest in museum displays, their silk faded, but their shapes still commanding attention. They speak of an era when elegance was measured in inches, and when the body was as much a product of craftsmanship as the clothes it wore. To look at them is to see not just an accessory, but a philosophy, one that believed beauty could be built bone by bone, seam by seam. And so the corset remains a paradox in the history of body modification. It was both a prison and a stage, both a source of harm and of pride. In shaping the ribcage, it also shaped the lives of those who wore it, sometimes painfully, sometimes joyfully, but always with an impact that could not be unlaced. In the hills of Myanmar and northern Thailand lives the Kayan people, whose women are known for wearing brass coils that appear to stretch their necks to extraordinary lengths. To an outsider, the sight can be both mesmerizing and puzzling. A golden spiral rising from the collarbone, holding the head high. But the tradition is not a novelty. It is an old cultural practice tied to beauty, identity, and belonging. Every coil added is part of a lifetime story, worn in public view for all to read.
The practice begins in early childhood, often around the age of 5 or 6. A set of brass rings, heavy and polished, is wound around the neck, resting on the shoulders. Over the years, longer coils or additional rings are added. Contrary to popular belief, the neck itself is not physically stretched. Instead, the weight of the rings pushes down on the collarbone and compresses the rib cage, creating the illusion of a longer neck. The effect is striking, a transformation that signals maturity and cultural pride.
The origins of neck elongation among the Kayan are debated. Some say it was meant to protect women from being taken by rival tribes, as the unusual appearance would make them less appealing to outsiders. Others suggest it was the opposite, a mark of beauty and status within the community. Still others link it to myth, associating the elongated neck with the graceful form of a dragon, an important figure in local folklore. Wearing the coils is not without difficulty. The weight can exceed 10 kilograms, and the restriction limits neck movement. Removing the rings after many years can feel disorienting, as the muscles have grown accustomed to their support. Yet many Kayan women speak with pride about their coils, describing them as a visible connection to their heritage, as essential to their identity as language or song. The coils are not just ornaments, they are markers of life stages. Girls begin with shorter sets, and as they age, longer coils are added to mark significant events: a coming of age, a marriage, the birth of a child. Each change is a public acknowledgement of transition, turning the body into a living record of personal history. For generations, the tradition persisted quietly in the remote villages of Myanmar. But political unrest and economic hardship in the late 20th century pushed many Kayan people across the border into Thailand, where some settled in tourist areas. There, the image of the long-neck woman became a commercial attraction, drawing visitors eager to take photographs. This exposure brought new income, but also new criticism, with some accusing the practice of being exploited for profit. Within the Kayan community, opinions are divided. Some embrace the tourism as a way to preserve and share their culture, while others feel it turns a personal tradition into a spectacle. Younger generations sometimes choose not to wear the coils, preferring modern clothing and careers over the weight, literal and symbolic, of the brass. The decision, once automatic, has become a personal choice. Health concerns have also entered the conversation. Prolonged wearing of heavy coils can weaken neck muscles and alter posture. While most women adapt without major problems, the potential risks are part of why some choose to forego the tradition. Yet, for others, the physical demands are worth it, as the coils remain a cherished link to ancestors and a visible expression of cultural pride. The beauty ideal behind the stretched neck is rooted in the community's own values, not in outside standards. To the Kayan, the elongated neck is graceful, elegant, and unmistakably their own. In this way, it mirrors other forms of body modification across history, practices that might seem strange to outsiders, but are deeply meaningful to those within. The golden coils are also an exercise in continuity. Each ring is polished by hand, passed down through generations, and adjusted to fit the wearer's changing body. The sound of the metal, the feel of its weight, the shine in the sunlight, these are as much a part of the tradition as the visual effect. It is an experience that blends the physical, the symbolic, and the communal. Today, the stretched neck stands at a crossroads between preservation and change. Some see it as a fading tradition, others as a living art form. In either case, it remains one of the most visually distinctive examples of how humans have shaped their bodies to express beauty and identity. Whether worn in the quiet of a village
or under the gaze of tourists, the coils tell a story that belongs to the women who carry them and to the culture that shaped them.
In the end, the stretched neck is not about defying nature, but about redefining it. The human body becomes a canvas for cultural values, and the coils, heavy though they may be, are carried with dignity. They are both ornament and armor, linking the wearer to generations past and ensuring that the tradition's weight is felt not only on the shoulders but in the heart.
Across the world, the piercing of ears and noses is one of the most ancient and widespread forms of body modification. It is so common today that it can be easy to forget its long history and deep cultural meanings. From gold rings worn by pharaohs to bone plugs in remote villages, piercing has carried messages of beauty, identity, status, and even survival. The placement, the material, and the design all spoke to the wearer's place in the world, and the act of piercing itself was often a ritual of transformation.
In ancient Egypt, pierced ears were worn by both men and women, sometimes to display wealth through precious metals and gemstones, other times as protective amulets. Gold hoops have been found in the tombs of pharaohs, buried alongside them as symbols of eternal beauty and status. Piercing was not merely ornamentation, it was a declaration that the body could be enhanced, adorned, and made more complete through the addition of crafted materials.
In India, ear and nose piercings have been part of cultural tradition for centuries. The nose stud, particularly on the left nostril, is often linked to Ayurveda, which associates the placement with easing childbirth and menstrual discomfort. Earrings, meanwhile, are introduced in childhood, in ceremonies that mix beauty with religious devotion. In both cases, the piercings are rarely seen as optional. They are woven into the social and spiritual fabric of life, symbols of readiness, maturity, and community belonging.
In parts of Africa, the Maasai are known for stretching earlobes with heavy beadwork and metal ornaments. The process begins with a small hole and gradually increases in size, sometimes over many years. The long curved lobes frame the face and are considered beautiful markers of identity. Men and women alike take part, and the earrings themselves are often brightly colored, matching the beaded collars and necklaces worn during ceremonies and daily life.
Among the Berber people of North Africa, silver earrings and nose rings carry both aesthetic and symbolic meaning. They can signal marital status, tribal affiliation, or even act as a form of wealth, portable, wearable assets that could be traded or sold in times of need. The designs are distinctive, often incorporating intricate geometric patterns that connect the wearer to generations of artisans and family tradition.
In the Amazon, certain tribes practice septum piercing, inserting bones, feathers, or wooden ornaments through the nasal cartilage. These adornments are not random decoration. They are tied to rites of passage, hunting success, or spiritual beliefs. The size and complexity of the ornament can signal bravery or social rank. For outsiders, such piercings may seem extreme, but within the culture, they are essential visual cues in a shared language of identity.
The practice of ear and nose piercing also served practical purposes in some cultures. Sailors in the past wore gold earrings not only as decoration, but as a form of insurance. The metal could pay for a burial should they die far from home. The piercing itself was believed to improve eyesight, a superstition that endured long after its origins were forgotten. Piercing often involved ceremony and community participation. In many traditions, the moment of piercing was accompanied by music, chanting, or blessings, turning what could be a simple act into a meaningful rite. The pain, though brief, became part of the memory, a sign of endurance and a step toward a new role or status. For the youngest participants, the event was often their first encounter with a deliberate change to their body.
Materials used in piercings tell their own stories. Gold, silver, ivory, bone, shell, and wood, each carried specific meanings and values. The choice of material could reveal wealth, local resources, or the wearer's role in society. In some places, only certain metals were considered pure enough for ceremonial use, while in others, everyday wear featured simpler, more abundant materials.
Religious and spiritual symbolism often surrounded piercings. In Hinduism, for example, ear-piercing ceremonies are performed as acts of purification. In some African and Pacific cultures, nose ornaments were believed to guard against evil spirits or to connect the wearer to ancestral power. Across time and geography, piercing has rarely been just decoration. It is a statement, a safeguard, and a link to unseen worlds. Today, ear and nose piercings span the spectrum, from everyday fashion to expressions of heritage. Modern styles may borrow from ancient designs, sometimes knowingly, sometimes without awareness of their origins. While the meanings have shifted, the impulse remains the same: to alter the body in a way that makes it speak more clearly about who we are, where we come from, and what we value. And so through gold hoops, silver studs, bone plugs, and beaded rings, the simple act of piercing the ear or nose connects us to millennia of human history. Whether worn to signal beauty, bravery, faith, or belonging, these small openings in the flesh have always opened doors into larger stories. Stories carried not in books or monuments, but in the living display of the human body. Scarification, the deliberate creation of patterns and symbols on the skin through cutting or burning, is one of the oldest and most enduring forms of body modification. Found in parts of Africa, Oceania, and among some indigenous groups in the Americas, it transforms the body into a living canvas of raised lines and textured designs. To those who wear them, these marks are more than decoration. They carry personal histories, cultural codes, and spiritual meanings that cannot be removed or erased. In many societies, scarification is a rite of passage. Among the Dinka of South Sudan, boys receive distinctive forehead patterns as part of their initiation into manhood. The process is both physical and symbolic. The pain endured is proof of readiness, and the design is a permanent marker of belonging. The pattern identifies not just the individual, but their family and community ties, visible at a glance to anyone familiar with the tradition. The raised scars are created by carefully cutting the skin with knives, razors, or sharpened stones. Sometimes the wounds are rubbed with ash, clay, or plant extracts to encourage the skin to rise during healing. Each cut must be precise, and the process can take hours or even days. The healing itself is part of the ritual. Swelling, tenderness, and eventual transformation of the skin into intricate tactile designs that catch the light in ways no tattoo can replicate. Among the Karo people of Ethiopia, scarification has long been associated with beauty and social standing. Women receive elaborate patterns across the torso and abdomen, marks that are seen as enhancing their attractiveness and demonstrating resilience. For men, scars can signify success in hunting or victory in battle.
These designs are often chosen for their aesthetic balance as much as their symbolic meaning, blending art and identity into one form.
Scarification can also carry spiritual weight. In some communities, the marks serve as protection against evil spirits or as offerings to ancestors. The designs may echo patterns found in nature: the shells of beetles, the ridges of leaves, the flow of rivers, drawing on the belief that these shapes hold power. In this way, scarification becomes a way of wearing the world on one's skin, connecting the body to the environment and the unseen forces that shape life.
The social function of scarification is profound. In places where clothing is minimal due to climate, the skin itself becomes the primary space for displaying cultural identity. The marks are visible in daily life, during ceremonies, and in interactions with outsiders. They can act as passports, instantly signaling origin and status. To be unmarked in a marked society is to be incomplete, an absence noticed as quickly as the presence of scars.
The endurance required for scarification is part of its meaning. The process is painful, and there is always the risk of infection, especially in pre-modern settings. Yet enduring this ordeal without complaint is a public demonstration of strength. The ability to remain still and silent under the blade or burning stick is often praised, and those who falter may face shame or teasing. The pain becomes a shared memory, binding the participants to their peers and elders.
Colonial contact disrupted scarification traditions in many regions. Missionaries and colonial governments often viewed the practice as primitive, discouraging, or outright banning it. In some cases, scarification was linked to criminality or rebellion, giving authorities another reason to suppress it. Yet, even under pressure, the tradition persisted, sometimes moving to hidden spaces, or becoming more symbolic and less widespread.
In the modern era, scarification has experienced both decline and revival. In many traditional communities, younger generations have moved away from the practice, influenced by urban life and global beauty standards. At the same time, body modification enthusiasts in other parts of the world have adopted scarification as an alternative to tattooing, valuing its unique texture and permanence. This revival, however, is often separated from its cultural roots, raising questions about appropriation and respect.
For those who carry traditional scars, each mark remains deeply personal. They are reminders of youth, of ceremonies attended, of challenges overcome. Even when the wider culture changes, the skin retains its record. A scar, unlike ink, can fade but never vanish. Its texture remains under the hand, a quiet testimony to a moment in time.
Seen through an outsider's lens, scarification may appear as an act of pain for beauty. But within the communities that practice it, it is a language of skin, one that can express belonging, strength, faith, and beauty all at once. The raised lines are as deliberate as any written text, and their meaning is known not just to the wearer, but to those who share the same tradition. In the end, scarification stands as one of the most profound examples of the body as a cultural document. It tells a story that cannot be erased, worn with pride, and sometimes with longing for a time when these marks were part of everyday life. To trace a finger over those raised patterns is to read a biography written not in words, but in the living language of the skin. In the Omo Valley of southern Ethiopia, among the Mercy and Surma peoples, the sight of women wearing large clay or wooden plates in their lower lips is a tradition both striking and deeply symbolic. To outsiders, it is often one of the most photographed cultural practices in Africa. Yet, behind the dramatic appearance lies a complex web of meaning, a blend of beauty standards, social customs, and personal choice, shaped by centuries of continuity. The practice usually begins in a girl's late teens. A small incision is made in the lower lip, and a small wooden peg or clay plug is inserted to keep it open. Over time, larger plates replace the smaller ones, gradually stretching the lip to accommodate discs that can reach over 20 centimeters in diameter. The process is slow, requiring patience, resilience, and a willingness to endure discomfort in pursuit of cultural ideals. Historically, the size of the plate has been linked to social status and desirability. Among the Mursi, a larger plate could signify a higher bride price measured in cattle. This association made the practice both personal and economic. A family's wealth and standing could be influenced by the endurance and commitment of their daughters. For the women themselves, the plate was a visible marker of maturity and readiness for marriage. The plates are often decorated with patterns, or painted with natural pigments. Each design can carry meaning, symbolic references to the wearer's clan, personal milestones, or aesthetic preferences. Because the plates are removable, they also serve as a kind of ceremonial accessory, worn during dances, markets, and rituals, but sometimes set aside during daily labor. This flexibility turns the lip plate into both a permanent alteration and a temporary ornament. While the origins of the practice are debated, one theory suggests it may have begun as a deterrent to slave raiders. The altered lip, it is said, would make women less likely to be taken. Whether or not this is true, the tradition evolved into a valued cultural expression, embraced and maintained long after the threat of raiding had faded. Today, its significance is tied more to identity than to defense. The act of stretching the lip is not without challenges. The skin can tear, infections can occur, and speaking or eating may require adaptation. Yet, for those committed to the tradition, these obstacles are outweighed by the pride of fulfilling cultural expectation. The willingness to endure is itself a form of strength, admired and respected within the community.
Like many traditional practices, lip plating has faced outside criticism. Missionaries, colonial authorities, and later government programs often discouraged or banned it, framing it as backward or harmful. Photographs taken by outsiders sometimes reduced it to a curiosity stripped of its context. In these portrayals, the women became spectacles rather than individuals with their own voices and choices.
In recent decades, younger women have increasingly chosen not to adopt the practice. Education, changing beauty ideals, and economic opportunities outside of traditional roles have reshaped priorities. Some now see the lip plate as impractical in modern contexts, while others still value it as a proud emblem of heritage. The decision has shifted from an expectation to a personal choice, though community norms can still exert strong influence.
Tourism has added another layer to the story. Visitors to the Omo Valley often seek photographs of lip plates, sometimes paying for the privilege. This has provided income for some women, but has also raised concerns about exploitation and the reduction of a living tradition to a staged performance for outsiders. Within the community, opinions differ on whether tourism helps preserve the practice
or distorts it. For those who continue to wear them, lip plates remain deeply personal. They are part of a woman's self-presentation, her public face in the most literal sense. The plate speaks before she does, telling others about her age, her family, her commitment to tradition. It is a statement of belonging, visible from across a field or marketplace. When viewed within its cultural framework, the lip plate is less about shock and more about connection. It ties the wearer to generations of women before her, to stories told during the long process of stretching, to ceremonies where the plates gleam in the firelight. It is a tradition carried in the body, renewed each time a girl chooses to take the first step toward wearing one. In the end, lip plating is a reminder that beauty is not universal, but shaped by the values of a community. What might seem unusual or extreme to one culture can be a cherished expression in another. The plate, heavy in the lip, is light with meaning, a disc not just of clay or wood, but of history, identity, and the resilience of a tradition that still finds ways to endure. Body modification has always balanced beauty with risk. Whether through piercing, tattooing, scarification, or more extreme alterations, the desire to transform the body often comes with hidden dangers. In societies without modern medicine, these risks were part of the accepted cost, endured in pursuit of status, belonging, or spiritual protection. Even today, when procedures can be done in sterile studios, complications still remind us that altering the body is never entirely without consequence. Infections were among the most common dangers in the past. A cut for scarification, a puncture for piercing, or the insertion of a decorative object all created openings for bacteria. Without antibiotics, even a minor infection could become life-threatening. In some cases, the beauty of the ornament was overshadowed by fever, swelling, or permanent damage. Yet many accepted this as a natural hazard, no different from the risks of childbirth or hunting. Allergic reactions to materials posed another problem. Some metals used for earrings or nose rings could cause skin irritation, swelling, or chronic wounds. In certain African communities, plant dyes or ashes rubbed into scarification cuts caused severe inflammation. These reactions were unpredictable, varying from person to person. What was harmless to one wearer could be dangerous to another, turning a mark of beauty into a source of illness.
More extreme modifications, such as foot binding in China or tight lacing corsets in Europe, carried long-term health consequences. Bound feet often led to lifelong mobility issues, while compressed rib cages could affect breathing and organ function. In these cases, the damage was slow and cumulative, accepted as the price of meeting a cultural ideal. The harm was not immediate, but unfolded over years, making it part of the body's everyday reality.
Even in piercing, size and weight could become hazards. Heavy earrings or large plugs could tear earlobes, leading to scarring or the need for repair. In some Pacific cultures, massive ear ornaments were a sign of prestige, but they required constant care to prevent splitting the skin. If the tissue failed, the mark of status could become a visible injury, an unintended alteration to the body's story.
Accidents during the modification process were also a danger. Tools for tattooing or scarification, often improvised from bone, wood, or metal, could slip, leaving unintended marks or deeper wounds. In certain ritual contexts, the process had to be completed in a single sitting, increasing the risk as fatigue set in for both practitioner and participant. The scar or tattoo might heal unevenly, altering its intended meaning. In societies where body modification signaled rank or group identity, wearing the wrong design could bring social danger. An unearned tattoo or scar pattern might provoke punishment, from public shaming to physical retaliation. The body, in this case, became a political statement, and the wrong statement could have consequences far beyond the skin.
Modern body modification has reduced many of these physical risks through sterilization, regulated tools, and medical knowledge. Yet, even today, complications happen. Infections from poorly cleaned equipment, allergic reactions to pigments, or rejection of implants, or nerve damage from piercings placed incorrectly. The technology has improved, but the body still has its limits, and it will resist intrusion when pushed too far.
Some dangers are psychological rather than physical. In certain contexts, modifications done for belonging can lead to regret if personal values or community ties change. A mark that once opened doors may later close them, especially if the surrounding culture shifts. This is a risk shared by ancient and modern wearers alike. The permanence of the body's story can outlast the chapter in which it was written.
The dangerous side of ornament is not only a cautionary tale, but also a testament to the human willingness to accept risk for meaning. Across history, people have knowingly faced pain, illness, and even death to align their bodies with their culture's vision of beauty, honor, or spirituality. The fact that the tradition continued despite these costs speaks to the deep importance these modifications held.
Today, museums display the tools once used for these transformations. Sharpened thorns, carved needles, bone awls. Their edges are worn, their handles polished by countless hands. They are reminders that every mark on the human body has two sides. The story it tells to others, and the private story of what it took to create it. Both are part of the ornament's truth.
In the end, the risks of body modification are inseparable from its meaning. Beauty and danger, pride and pain, they are woven together in every cut, puncture, or binding. To understand these traditions fully is to acknowledge both the artistry and the cost, seeing not only the finished design, but the courage or the gamble that lay behind it.
In the modern era of body modification, some of the most striking changes are those you can't see immediately, at least not in the traditional sense. Subdermal implants, placed beneath the skin to create raised patterns or shapes, represent a new frontier in altering the human form. Unlike tattoos or piercings, these changes are three-dimensional, transforming the body into a landscape of contours that shift with light and movement. The effect can be subtle or dramatic, but always permanent in its intent. The origins of subdermal modification are tied to both medical technology and artistic experimentation. Advances in surgical tools, sterilization, and biocompatible materials have made it possible to insert objects under the skin with relative safety. What was once the domain of reconstructive surgery has, for some, become a form of personal expression. Artists in the body modification community began experimenting with silicone,
Teflon and other safe materials to create shapes that could be felt and seen beneath the skin.
These implants can take many forms. Small beads placed in a row, intricate designs like stars or symbols, or even shapes meant to mimic horns or ridges. Placement varies from the forearms to the chest, hands or head. Some designs are meant to be noticed immediately, catching the eye through tight clothing or bare skin, while others are hidden, known only to the wearer and those they choose to share them with.
The procedure is surgical in nature. After numbing the area, a small incision is made, and a pocket is created beneath the skin where the implant will rest. The skin is then closed over the object, which remains in place as the body heals around it. Healing can take weeks, and swelling may temporarily obscure the final shape. In skilled hands, the process is safe, though it still carries the risks of infection, rejection, or scarring. One of the most famous applications of subdermal implants is in the creation of horns, small symmetrical bumps on the forehead, giving the wearer an otherworldly appearance. While shocking to some, to others these are simply another form of personal art, a statement of individuality and control over the body. In this way, subdermal implants echo the symbolic weight of ancient modifications, reinterpreted for a contemporary audience. The appeal of these implants varies. For some, it is purely aesthetic, a desire to create a unique texture or silhouette. For others, it is deeply symbolic, a way of embodying personal beliefs or life experiences. The tactile nature of the modification means it is not only visual, but also physical. The wearer feels the change every time they touch that part of their body. Critics of subdermal modification point to the medical risks and the challenges of reversal. Unlike tattoos, which can be lightened or covered, implants require surgical removal if the wearer changes their mind. Even then, the skin may never return fully to its original state. This permanence is part of the appeal for some, but a deterrent for others. The subdermal revolution also raises questions about the boundary between art and medicine. Procedures that once belonged strictly to hospitals are now performed in studios by body modification artists. While many of these practitioners are highly skilled, regulation varies widely by region, leaving some clients vulnerable to unsafe practices.
The debate over who should be allowed to perform such work is ongoing. In certain subcultures, subdermal implants are markers of belonging, much like tattoos or piercings in the past. They can signal membership in a community that values extreme body art, or they can simply be a quiet act of self-definition in a world where most bodies follow conventional forms. The choice is often less about shocking others and more about satisfying a personal vision. The materials themselves are a testament to technological progress. Medical-grade silicone, implant-grade steel, and bioplastics ensure that the body can coexist with these foreign objects for decades. This marriage of biology and industry is part of what makes the subdermal revolution unique. It is an ancient impulse for self-modification, executed with the tools of modern science. Yet for all its novelty, subdermal modification still fits into the long human tradition of shaping the body for meaning. Like the stretched necks of the Khayyam or the scarified chests of the Sepik rivermen, it is a way of writing identity into the skin, not with ink or cuts, but with shape and shadow. The body becomes a gallery, and the art is not only seen, but felt. In the end, the subdermal revolution is less about rebellion and more about the continuation of an old story, the human desire to turn flesh into statement. Whether subtle or dramatic, hidden or displayed, these implants remind us that the canvas of the body has always been more than two-dimensional, and that our relationship with it is still evolving beneath the surface. Among the more recent forms of body modification are procedures known as splitting and sculpting, alterations that change the natural contours of the body in ways both subtle and dramatic. These practices take the long human tradition of reshaping the body and apply modern tools and surgical precision. The results can be decorative, symbolic, or deeply personal, reflecting the wearer's vision of themselves as much as their willingness to endure transformation. Splitting most often refers to tongue splitting, the deliberate division of the tongue into two separate sections, creating a forked shape reminiscent of a snake or lizard. The procedure is surgical, involving a clean cut through the tongue surface and muscle, followed by careful healing. For some, the appeal is aesthetic. For others, it allows greater control of tongue movement, enabling unique gestures
or performances. Like many forms of modification, it blends artistry with function.
Sculpting, on the other hand, encompasses a wide range of alterations designed to reshape the ears, nose, or other facial features. Ear pointing, sometimes called elf ears, involves reshaping the cartilage to create a pointed tip. It is a purely aesthetic change, drawing on fantasy imagery and mythological archetypes. Nose reshaping within the modification community can be more decorative than medical, often combined with piercings or implants to create distinctive profiles.
The motivations behind splitting and sculpting vary widely. For some, these changes are expressions of identity, signaling membership in a subculture or commitment to a personal ideal. For others, the procedures are about embodying an internal vision, making the outside reflect something that has long been felt inside. In this sense, they are less about rebellion and more about alignment between self-perception and appearance.
The procedures require significant trust between the client and the practitioner. Tongue splitting must be done with precise control to avoid excessive bleeding or nerve damage. Sculpting, especially when involving cartilage, demands skill to ensure both symmetry and safe healing. In regions without clear regulations, finding experienced and reputable practitioners can be a challenge, making research and preparation essential.
Pain is part of the process, as with most body modifications. Splitting the tongue results in a sharp, immediate discomfort, followed by days of swelling and difficulty speaking. Sculpting procedures, depending on their complexity, can involve weeks of tenderness. Yet for many, the temporary pain is outweighed by the satisfaction of seeing the body transformed into something intentionally designed. Healing is a critical stage. In tongue splitting, the two halves must be trained to move independently, a process that can take months. In sculpting, cartilage must be supported during recovery to maintain the desired shape. Both require careful hygiene to prevent infection. A reminder that even in a world of modern medicine, the body's healing process follows its own pace.
Public reaction to splitting and sculpting is often mixed. Some admire the artistry and commitment. Others see it as extreme or unsettling. This tension is not new. Throughout history, unusual body modifications have provoked fascination
and criticism in equal measure. What changes is the cultural context, which determines whether a practice is seen as fashionable, taboo, or somewhere in between.
In certain circles, these modifications carry symbolic meaning. A forked tongue might represent transformation, duality, or a connection to animal traits. Pointed ears might symbolize otherworldliness or a deliberate break from conventional human appearance. Whether the meaning is personal or shared within a community, the modification becomes a form of storytelling, one told in the language of the body.
Technological advances have expanded what is possible. Modern surgical tools allow for precision that ancient practitioners could only dream of, reducing complications and enabling more ambitious designs. Yet the core impulse remains the same as in older traditions: to take what nature has given and reshape it according to human will and imagination.
Critics often frame these modifications as irreversible mistakes, but those who choose them rarely see it that way. For them, the body is not a fixed form to be preserved unchanged, but a canvas to be worked on, revised, and refined. This philosophy places personal agency at the center, making each change not a loss of what was, but a gain of what could be.
In the end, splitting and sculpting are modern chapters in a very old story. They are proof that the human relationship with the body is dynamic, shaped by culture, technology, and individual desire. Whether admired or misunderstood, these transformations continue the long tradition of turning flesh into art, and of letting that art speak silently but unmistakably for the person who wears it.
In today's interconnected world, body modification traditions that were once confined to specific regions or cultures are visible almost everywhere. Social media, travel, and fashion have carried tattoos, piercings, scarification, and other practices far beyond their places of origin. But with this global spread comes a difficult question. When is adopting a tradition an act of cultural appreciation, and when is it cultural appropriation? The difference lies not only in intention, but in understanding, respect, and context.
Many ancient body modifications had deep symbolic meanings. A facial tattoo in Polynesia was not simply decoration. It was a record of lineage, rank, and personal achievements. Scarification in parts of Africa carried spiritual protection and marked life transitions. When these symbols are replicated by outsiders without knowledge of their origins, they can lose their cultural weight, becoming mere aesthetic choices detached from the histories that gave them power.
Appropriation often occurs when a practice is removed from its cultural framework and presented as fashion or novelty. This can happen with good intentions. A traveler receives a tattoo inspired by indigenous patterns, believing it to be a tribute, but without understanding the specific meaning of the design, the act risks erasing or distorting its significance. The design may have been meant only for certain people, such as community elders, warriors, or initiates.
At the same time, cultural exchange has always been part of human history. Trade routes carried jewelry, textiles, and techniques across continents. The art of tattooing, for example, moved between cultures and evolved with each new place it reached. Some argue that adopting body modification traditions today is simply a continuation of this long process, a natural blending of human creativity across borders.
The tension arises when the original culture has been marginalized or oppressed, and its traditions were once discouraged or outlawed by the very societies now embracing them. For example, Maori Moko facial tattoos were banned under colonial rule, and only recently have Maori communities reclaimed them with pride. Seeing similar patterns worn casually by people with no connection to that heritage can feel like a painful reminder of that suppression.
Respectful continuation is possible, but it requires effort. This means learning the history, understanding the meaning, and seeking consent from those who carry the tradition forward. In some communities, artists from outside are invited to learn and participate. In others, certain designs remain reserved for insiders. The willingness to listen and adapt to these boundaries often marks the difference between appreciation and appropriation.
In the modern tattoo and piercing industries, some practitioners make it a point to educate clients about the origins of the styles they request. A Polynesian-inspired armband may come with a discussion about its meaning and the choice to adapt the design to avoid sacred symbols. Similarly, scarification artists might explain the significance of certain African patterns before using them in a different context. This exchange of knowledge helps preserve respect,
Even as traditions travel, there are also cases where traditions evolve into global forms that no longer belong to one culture alone. Nose piercings, once specific to South Asia and parts of the Middle East, are now worn around the world, often without cultural association. Whether this is loss or liberation depends on perspective. Some see it as erasure, others as a shared human aesthetic.
Social media complicates the issue further. A photograph of a traditional practice can inspire thousands to imitate it without any awareness of its meaning. At the same time, it can also help indigenous artists and practitioners reach wider audiences, reclaim visibility, and share their culture on their own terms. The same platform that enables appropriation can also empower continuation.
For those who wish to wear another culture's body art, the most important step is humility. Asking questions, seeking out cultural voices, and understanding the responsibility that comes with wearing symbols of identity can turn a shallow trend into a meaningful connection. The body, after all, is not just a personal canvas. It can also carry the stories of others.
In the end, the line between appropriation and continuation is not always clear, but the difference often lies in respect. Traditions that survive for centuries deserve to be approached with care. Whether one is born into a culture or comes to it later, carrying its symbols should be done with the same weight they hold for those who have worn them for generations. To do less is to take without giving back. Throughout history, the human body has served as more than a vessel for life. It has been a record, a statement, and a legacy. Marks made on the skin, changes in shape, and additions of ornament have outlasted their wearers, leaving behind traces for future generations to interpret. In this way, body modifications are not just personal choices, they are pieces of cultural heritage carried forward in flesh and memory. Some modifications are intended to be inherited in spirit rather than form. A tattoo pattern passed from grandmother to granddaughter may change with each generation, yet its essence remains the same. The shapes, the lines, and the placement all speak of continuity, a thread linking past and present. In communities where oral history is central, the body
can act as a living chapter in that unbroken story. Archaeology has revealed how powerful these legacies can be. Mummified remains from ancient Egypt still bear tattoos thousands of years after their creation. Skeletons with shaped skulls from Peru tell us about social structures long vanished. Even simple piercings leave marks in bone, whispering the presence of adornments long since decayed. The body, when modified, becomes part of the archaeological record, surviving beyond its lifetime. In some cultures, body modifications serve as a kind of will, an inheritance of identity. They declare allegiance to a group, faith, or philosophy that survives the individual. In this sense, the body becomes a message to the future. I was here. I belonged to this. The designs and shapes carry values, beliefs, and aesthetics into the hands and eyes of people yet unborn. This legacy is not always preserved in its original form. When cultures are displaced or colonized, traditional modifications can fade or change, altered by necessity or suppression. Yet even fragments can carry meaning. A design remembered in part, a technique adapted with new materials, these become seeds for revival when the time is right. The body's record is not erased easily. Museums hold some of the most striking examples of the body as legacy. Preserved heads from Maori warriors, tattooed mummies from Siberia, and jewelry from ancient burials all speak to the desire to be remembered not only through words, but through the physical marks we leave behind. These artifacts carry stories that cannot be told in writing alone. Images of today's tattoos, piercings, and sculptures will survive in archives long after the bodies themselves are gone. Future historians may study them as we now study the artifacts of ancient cultures, reading their symbols for insight into the world that made them. The legacy carried in the body is not only about heritage, it is also about change. Each generation reshapes traditions, adding new techniques, discarding others, blending old meanings with new interpretations. What is permanent in the skin is not necessarily fixed in the culture. The living legacy adapts to the times. Ultimately, the body as legacy is a reminder of the human desire to be remembered. Through deliberate change, people have sought to leave a trace that outlasts their own heartbeat. Whether a family design, a tribal pattern, or a personal emblem, the marks remain as silent storytellers, carrying identity forward through time. To touch a mark left decades or centuries ago is to bridge that time. It is to place your hand where another once chose to change themselves, for reasons both personal and communal. In that moment, the past is not distant. It is right there, beneath your fingertips, speaking without words. Across continents and centuries, the human body has been shaped, stretched, marked, and adorned in ways that might surprise or even unsettle those seeing them for the first time. From the first stone and bone needles carving pigment into Neolithic skin, to the brass coils of the Cayenne, the bound feet of imperial China, the elongated skulls of the Paracas, and the subdermal implants of today, the impulse has been the same: to make the body say something more than nature alone intended.
Some changes were declarations of beauty, tailored to the ideals of a specific time and place. Others were signs of courage, wealth, faith, or belonging. In some cases, they were protective charms, a barrier against evil spirits, illness, or misfortune. And sometimes they were simply personal statements, an assertion of individuality against the blank canvas of the unaltered body. But whether rooted in the collective or the personal, these modifications were rarely meaningless. The shape of a rib cage, the pattern of a scar, the length of a neck, each carried stories, often wordless, that those within the culture could read at a glance.
We have seen how these traditions could be both unifying and divisive. Within a community, the marks might welcome you, affirming that you have endured the same trials and earned the same honors as those around you. Outside of it, the same marks could invite fear, ridicule, or punishment. Tattoos that spoke of high rank in one society might be treated as signs of criminality in another. A practice celebrated as beautiful in one generation could be condemned as barbaric in the next. The meaning of the body is always in conversation with the culture that sees it.
The risks, too, have been constant companions. Pain was often the point, a rite of passage where endurance proved readiness. But alongside that pain came the dangers of infection, injury, and long-term health effects. Feet bound in childhood could never walk the same again. Tight-laced waists could shape bones and organs in ways that lasted a lifetime. Heavy earrings could tear through flesh, and unsterilized tools could leave scars that were never meant to be part of the design. These were not side effects to be avoided. They were accepted as part of the cost.
And yet the willingness to take these risks speaks to something enduring in the human spirit. For thousands of years, we have used the body not just to live in, but to speak through. We have made it an archive, a gallery, a shield, and a signpost. When we mark it, we are not only changing how others see us, we are shaping how we see ourselves.
In the modern world, we often encounter these traditions in fragments. A tattoo design borrowed without its story. A photograph of scarification stripped of its context. A piercings trend divorced from its origins. This raises questions about cultural appropriation and the responsibilities that come with wearing marks from another's history. Yet it also offers opportunities for cultural exchange, revival, and the reimagining of old practices in new forms. The challenge is to keep the meaning alive, to carry the weight of what we choose to wear.
Some of the changes we've explored are fading, kept alive by a few elders or practiced only on ceremonial occasions. Others are thriving, adapted to modern tastes and technologies. Silicon replacing bone, stainless steel replacing gold, tattoo machines replacing bone combs. The tools have changed, but the desire has not. The body is still a canvas, and we are still the artists. When we look back at the long history of body modification, what stands out is not the strangeness, but the familiarity. We may not bind feet or elongate skulls, but we still alter our bodies with haircuts, cosmetics, gym routines, piercings, surgeries. The scale and method may differ, but the impulse is the same. We are still telling stories in flesh. So tonight, as we close this journey through the strange and beautiful ways humanity has reshaped itself, perhaps the lasting thought is this: our bodies are not only who we are now, but also who we have been. They carry echoes of ancestors, fragments of beliefs, and the marks of choices made long before us. And when we change them, we join a lineage stretching back into the deep past. A conversation that began long before we arrived and will continue long after we are gone.
This has been Boring Boris. Boring history for sleep. Good night.